So my name is Jeff Belkora, and I am a part-time faculty member at the University of California, San Francisco. I'm here tonight in my capacity as a consultant scientist in residence with Thomas Doll, a CPA firm, actually a general financial services firm that's dental specific. And I want to ask Brett now, my co-presenter and our expert, to introduce himself.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm a principal at Thomas Doll. I've been with the firm for 6 years, and we are located in Walnut Creek, California. We try to offer a one-stop shop for financial solutions to dentists, whether it be bookkeeping, tax, pension, retirement planning, payroll, or wealth management services. So our firm's been around a long time. We've got about a half a century behind us. And we were one of the founding member firms of the Academy of Dental CPAs. That's the ADCPA, which is an organization that includes 24 CPA firms, dental CPA firms like ours, nationwide, and we represent over 10,000 dentists. So my specialties in the firm include minimizing taxes, practice benchmarking, practice transitions, buyer representation, and retirement planning. Got a master's in accounting and got that from Southern Utah University. So that's my introduction, and what we'll be talking through, everybody's got the agenda here. Our goal tonight is just to get some good dialogue going, and Jeff will speak a little bit more on that.
Yeah, we want to get dialogue going on the subject of coming trends in insurance reimbursement, and we don't have all the answers by any means. We just have, I think, some good information and some questions, and we want to activate your critical reflection in this area, so that you can begin taking steps and making plans to adjust, your practices for these changing realities. So I'm going to put on the screen now our agenda for the evening. You got the preliminary materials, and now this is really our time points. So we thought we'd actually start a little bit off topic for insurance, but very much on topic for 2020. Brett is just going to say a few words about COVID-related financial topics. A few of you were, I noticed, on our webinar earlier this year in April and May, we did a series of webinars on managing COVID and small business loans. And so Thomas Doll has been doing these kinds of educational programming, and I've been working with the company. That's really my specialty area, is to help the company present professional education programs like this. So Brett will give you a few highlights of his current thinking and the firm's current thinking on very topical issues as we approach the end of the year. Then we're going to go into really the insurance topic, and we want to do an instant benchmarking survey. So I'm going to hope you all have access to a browser on one of your devices that's at hand, and I'm going to point you to a URL where we're going to just capture your responses to these 3 questions. And then we're going to compare and contrast and have a little discussion about where people are, and we'll probably see quite a lot of variation in people's situations. Then we're going to talk about, if these changes come to pass, what's the impact on quality of care and on your practice finances? And then we'll do a poll on how you all might be planning to respond to these changes. And we've got a half dozen suggested responses here, and you may come up with others. Possible responses. And by around 7:10, we're going to look at a case study, because one of the key things that everyone needs to adjust their expectations around is practice valuations, which will be quite different, we think, in the emerging world of changed insurance reimbursements. So we'll aim to wrap up by 7:30. I think when this was scheduled in person, we were going to be 2 hours and kind of stretch out and spend a little bit more time together. But I think on Zoom, we're already probably fatigued from the day, and then, spending more than an hour on Zoom might be too much. Brett and I will stick around at 7:30 if there are any overtime questions or anything. We'll be happy to stick around and answer other questions. But we'll declare a stop so that people can sign off in an orderly fashion at 7:30. Okay, so Brett, oh, and at any time you can use the chat function here to message us. You can also unmute yourself. It's a relatively small group. I think we won't descend into chaos if we just invite your your input at any time. And I'll be monitoring the chat. You know, we'll keep an eye on things. If you want to be chatting privately, you can designate one of us to chat privately to. Otherwise, your comments will be seen by everyone, and we can all chime in on the chat as needed. So Brett, go ahead and give us a brief. I know there's a lot to say about this, but keep yourself to, you know, 5 minutes on the sort of COVID updates, and then we'll get into the insurance topic. Go ahead, Brett.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to jump into just a few of the items that I've been getting asked the most from my clients, and I'll just kind of assume that those are the same things that are on your minds. The first one, PPP loan forgiveness. So hopefully you all got a PPP loan. And at this point, some of you may have already applied for PPP loan forgiveness. Some of you may have been holding off. You know, there's a lot of talk on potentially being able to get automatic loan forgiveness for PPP loans under $150,000. So that never went through. They did make a simplified application for loans under $50,000. And so if you've gotten a loan under $50,000, you know, you should go ahead and get that submitted. It's called the 3508S form. 3508. Under $50,000, submit them. Use the 3508S form. So when you go into your bank's loan forgiveness portal, they should have 3 different application forms. A 3508S, a 3508 Easy, that's for loans in between 50 and 150, and then the normal application, the long form 3508. So that should help you decide which one. You know, really you need to reach out to your bank, get the link to the portal. Most of the banks are using a specific portal to submit everything, and we think you should move forward. If you still want to hold off and see if the loans under 150K will be automatically forgiven at some point, there's no stress in that. You have 10 months to apply. So just a reminder, 10 months from the date that your covered period ended. So if you were using a 24-week covered period, you know, you had 24 weeks from the date that the money hit your bank, then you have 10 months to apply for loan forgiveness after that date. So hopefully that clarifies things there. For planning for taxes on this thing, you know, the way it's written in the law right now is you don't get a deduction for any of the expenses that were paid for with PPP money. So if you got a $100,000 loan and you spend it all on payroll costs, basically your profit and loss statement might show, you know, let's say your profit and loss shows $100,000 of net income that you're taxed on, but in reality, you're going to pay tax on $200,000 because you can't deduct $100,000 worth of expenses that are on your profit and loss statement. And so what I'm advising my clients to do is to just, you know, plan. If you're making estimated tax payments, you know, make sure that that's included in your estimated tax payments you're going to be making at January 15th. At least hit the safe harbor. So the safe harbor means that you pay 90% of the current year's tax. You know, just to make sure you're not getting underpayment penalties. And, you know, there is a chance that changes, but as the law is written right now, they're not allowing the deduction for those PPP expenses. And there are some potential issues with that, lots of lobbying going on. So if that changes, you know, worst case scenario is that you have some overpayment going on and you get to apply it to next year. So that's my take on the taxability of this thing. If you have any questions about this stuff, we have some resources on our website. Jeff has it linked right there. thomasdahl.com, COVID-19. We have a lot of resources on our page. And then you can always reach out directly to me if you have specific questions for your situation.
Great, thanks, Brett.
Jeff, I think we better leave it at that.
Yeah, let's move on from COVID. We'll, as I mentioned, we'll be happy to stick around for overtime at 7:30. But I think the main topic for today is the insurance topic. So I'd like to invite everyone now to navigate, use their browser, navigate to this URL, tiny URL. That's the shortcut, tinyurl.com/SMCDS1, the numeral 1. And you'll get, I'll show it on my screen in a second. You'll get asked to input your projections and do some quick calculations. And if you can take a couple minutes to do that right now, we will do some instant benchmarking to see, how everyone is anticipating, their current reality, and then how they think their current reality might change. So let me show you on another screen what this survey looks like. It's here, tinyurl.com/SMCDS, so San Mateo County Dental Society 1, the numeral 1. And then you can just put in your projection of what percent, and this is going to be submitted anonymously. We just want to know what percent of your total revenue is from insurance. What is your average insurance discount relative to your true usual and customary rates? And then what you think that's going to be in 2 years, that discount. And so when you complete those numbers, you'll be able to hit the calculate button and see the current reduction and the projected reduction compared to your UCR collections. And then we want to use this data to stimulate a conversation. So I will give you a minute or two. If anyone has a question or needs to clarify this, open your microphone or go into the chat room and ask for any clarifications needed. I'm going to, resist the temptation to hum the Jeopardy music or anything, but I'm going to give you a couple minutes here to fill this out. Okay, let me show you our a spreadsheet with some of this data. And then I want to use that as a springboard for some further discussion. Hold on, give me 1 second. I'm looking on my other screen here. All right. So we may be missing a few of your responses if your responses are still trickling in, but this will give us an idea. So the questions were, what percent of your total revenue is from insurance? And we see a pretty wide variation here from, let's see, 43% is the low that I'm seeing here to 85% maybe on the high end. And then in terms of the discount relative to your true UCR, this is an even bigger range from 0 to 75. Looks like I'm just eyeballing this. And then in 2 years, looking at that trend, again, could range from 0 to 65. Now, the important thing for me is looking at the final column, well, not the final column, but the column K here, where we start to back out, okay, what are people projecting is going to be the reduction in revenue per $1 million of collections. So since we asked you for percentages, we don't know what your collections are. We can't tell you, what your loss will be relative to your collections, but we can just normalize and say per $1 million of collections, we're seeing people reporting as little as a $10,000, decrement, all the way up to the high of $480,000. So this is pretty typical. And again, your results may not be reflected because I just pulled down the spreadsheet and the calculations from a couple minutes ago. But this is pretty typical of the kind of range that we're seeing. Like, people really have very different environments from an insurance point of view, and are experiencing currently very different discounts relative to their UCR, and are projecting very different amounts. So, I mean, one of the things that tells me, let me switch back to our, I'll take some notes here. One of the things that tells me is that you probably need to be a little bit wary about accepting general advice. Like, if anybody is advising dentists in general about insurance responses to insurance changes, it's got to be very practice dependent. So that's one of my takeaways from looking at this kind of variation. I want to open it up and see if anybody else has any comments or takeaways, or how did going through this exercise make you think differently about your environment and the projections that you're making over the next couple of years. If anyone wants to chime in, unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'll ask Brett to comment from your client's perspective. What are you seeing with Thomas Dahl's clients, and are you seeing this kind of variation? What's your take, Brett?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the data that we just saw is right on with what I've been seeing elsewhere. We've been asking this question kind of on a macro scale. We've been asking this to people all over the place, different dental societies, and not just us, but other members of our organization, the Academy of Dental CPAs across the nation, has been seeing the trends that, if we're looking forward, into the future, people are expecting this discount between the UCR fees and the insurance rates that are being provided to just grow even larger. And that's the critical thing. So this isn't a new topic. This has been a topic and an issue that's been around for a long time, and we recognize that. But it's the concern about the trends nationwide and statewide, where we can see this gap potentially even growing bigger over time.
Yeah, and we want to talk a little bit about, this has to be a concern, I think, not just for your own practice finances and the viability of your practices. There are, I think, many other knock-on effects, one of which is the quality of care, the pressures that people may be experiencing with regard to quality of care. And then we'll talk a little bit later about practice valuations and how buyers and sellers may be looking at the same data with very different perspectives. Brett, this is making me think about the work that I did interviewing some of your clients and some of the firm's other clients. And we actually wrote this up in the Mouthpiece newsletter from earlier this year. So I just wanted to show you all that article, which you can go back to and reference. We talked specifically to 25 dentists, and we found that among those 25, there were 8 who were practicing out of network. And in this article, we really took a closer look at what it was about their environment that led them to move out of network. And it was interesting to me that, there was this kind of what I called the heroic journey. The heroic journey is an archetype, from literature, where a reluctant hero is faced with some challenges and hears a call to action and ignores the call to action initially. But over time, incidents occur that make it impossible. And one of the classic heroic journeys is Star Wars, when initially Luke Skywalker resists the call to action, but then he comes home and finds his aunt and uncle's, ranch or whatever it is destroyed, and decides he can't ignore the call anymore. So, this is kind of like what we saw with dentists saying that, back in the day, early in their careers, or maybe along the way, as they participated in diverse organizations, they saw the pressures, low quality care in response to different economic pressures. And they really swore, like, so, some of the things I'm looking at here are in the military service or in capitation environments or preferred provider organizations, sometimes through peer review. There were sometimes these incentives driving dentists to overtreatment on one hand, or conversely, sometimes to undertreatment. And what was interesting to me was that the theme that emerged from these interviews was these dentists said they swore they'd never wanted to practice that way, and that's what led them to establishing independent practices. And what I think we're seeing here is that for these 8 dentists, they may be kind of the canaries in the coal mine, where it got to be with the changes in their insurance rates and reimbursements that they just felt that they could no longer practice the way they wanted to, that they were compromising too much on quality. As I think I mentioned here in this article, they reach a breaking point where, for example, they might find that they're using the lab that they prefer to use. They're spending more on a crown than they're taking in, so they're subsidizing every crown they do, and yet they don't want to compromise and switch labs and compromise on quality. So this kind of tension that goes on is, we think, one of the things that dentists are going to have to figure out, how are you going to respond? So I'll just pause there and see if there are any comments or questions or clarifications before we move on.
Might be worthwhile asking this group, has anybody had any experiences where they've dealt with, challenges like this, and are these same things that Jeff, noticed while he was interviewing different dentists, similar to challenges that you guys may be facing as well?
Yes, my name's Robert, and I've been in practice going on 35 years, and I've seen the quality of dentistry coming out through my office from other offices fall because of this issue. And I made a commitment that I'm now in the process of completely divesting of any insurance companies whatsoever. I started about a year ago, and about 2 years ago, and I'm now getting to the point like I no longer accept any Delta. And now I'm finding Cigna and a couple others are downgrading. They're downgrading services. They're not paying for other services. They're doing a global fee for a crown, not paying for the buildup. And even when, say, for instance, somebody comes in with 5-6 millimeter pockets, probing depths of 5-6 millimeters, subturation and stuff, they're not even paying for root planing. So I've just said, okay, that's it, no more for me. And I taught at UOP Dental School too. So I just could not handle the lowering my quality for my patients.
Yeah, do you want to elaborate a little bit on, it's been a 2-year process. Do you feel like that has gone relatively smoothly? That, what I've heard is that it's a lot about communicating with your patients in order to retain them and bring them along with you.
Yeah, there's a lot of communication. A lot of times I've talked to patients a lot about it. But what I've found, interestingly enough, is with some insurance companies, my being out of network, I end up getting paid more for a service than I would have gotten paid if I was in network. So it's really interesting. It's just working out better for me.
Yeah.
Plus, I've switched to doing a few other things that helps with my bottom line.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Robert. I'm thinking, some of the comments let me just go through this, and it looks like we have a couple comments to add. You know, it is a long process. I've seen that with other clients, and people need to understand that. And there's some form of strategy to it that really needs to be considered. It's not just a matter of just dropping it. It's more of, you know, communication and training and going through the math and making sure you can figure that out. But those who have done it out of my client base have generally shared, you know, positive feedback on when all is said and done. Do we have another comment?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm Dr. Desai, and for last 2 years, I cancel all the PPO, of course, except Premier Delta. But now I am seeing some of the Aetna and some other insurance company coming up saying that you are out of network, but because they are controlled by such and such company, their contract allowance fees is only allowing this person. So it looks like that fees that we got paid by Aetna, it's lower than even PPO fees, and they are not putting percentage anymore, what percentage they are paying me, but instead they're putting patient co-payment, which is almost 2/3 patient co-payment, and they are paying me only 1/3 of a fees.
Yeah, so you're seeing, whereas Robert was seeing actually maybe a higher collection rate for some procedures through, and with some insurers, you're seeing a lower rate.
Yeah,
after
because
dropping some PPOs.
yeah, they are
Yeah.
saying that you are out of network, and the word they use is a contracted allowance fees, but we don't have any contracted or participating contracted allowance fees, but we don't have any knowledge of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, is this a situation where, again, similar to going out of network, you have to turn to your patient and explain that there's a gap that they need to fill out of pocket?
Oh, okay.
I'm asking the question. That just seems like
Oh.
a possible response.
Yeah, but we will be losing a lot of patient who has been coming for so many years, but I just feel like insurance is finding a way to pay lower fees to out of network.
Yeah, I mean, this is the research I've been doing on behalf of Thomas Dahl and their clients, is that your concern is certainly valid, that you're concerned about losing patients if you ask them to pay more out of pocket. However, what we found is that if you communicate that to them and have established a good trusting relationship, some patients go away, but then they often come back. Because they find that as long as you've been providing, the quality care that you're trying to protect, that they can't find that easily elsewhere. And that most dental insurance is not really insurance. It's a benefit that has limits and will run out. And so if they get much work done at all, they're going to be out of pocket, they're going to be paying out of pocket anyway. And that your dentistry may save them money over the long run, if it's higher quality and more attuned to exactly what they need for their best long-term prospects. So I think it's a new set of communication challenges for dentists that you may not be familiar with, but I think it's certainly an area that some dentists are finding success in. Is this type of communicating? Jeff, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Jeff, excuse me. There's one thing I wanted to add to this, is that a lot of the younger dentists need to be dentists in general have to be very wary about a high pressure sales. I've noticed a lot of patients coming to me complaining that I understand that financially it's difficult. I get it, but patients are very in tune to being high pressure and trying to sell a lot of dentistry, and their patients are coming and talking about how they're getting to that point where they are noticing dentists are just selling more than really treating.
Yeah.
And it's becoming very obvious.
You know, it's very interesting because there's an interesting parallel with the financial services industry, which is where Thomas Dahl is, right? Where, you know, there's a concept there of you really want to work with fiduciaries who are bound, duty bound to ethically bound to promote only your best interests. And I think that's got to be part of the conversation between an ethical dentist and their patients, is that, you know, I really, you know, have your long-term best interests in mind. And if our arrangement isn't going to work for you financially, you know, I'm prepared to accept that. But I do want to educate you to, you know, what I'm trying to do for you here. For example, by, you know, resisting the insurance restrictions and dropping some PPO plans, if that's what, you know, people are choosing to do in their practice. I think there is a way. I totally agree with you. You know, no one wants to be hard sold on procedures and dentistry, but I think there's a way to have that conversation and say, you know, I want to be your fiduciary and think about your best long-term interests and start from that position. Do you agree, Robert? Is that an approach that you see yourself and others taking, or am I off the mark here?
I know of several dentists where we will, when that issue comes up, we'll just tell the patient, you know, this is what I see, this is what you need, or where you're at, and we want to provide the best care. Now, I've had this happen to me where they say, well, it's just too expensive. They'll transfer out, but they'll come back. They'll come back because the feelings they get from other places.
Yeah.
And if you tell a patient, you know, get a second opinion, find somebody else that you know, so you can have an idea of really what's going on. And by all means, get a second opinion. I want the best for you, and this is the best thing for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really important point, that you're admitting fallibility. You're saying, hey, get a second opinion, and, you know, whatever is your best interest, I want to promote. And if I'm overlooking something, or you find somebody who's got a better strategy, you know, that's what I want for you. And I think it's kind of judo, because then people understand you're not pushing, and they're going to be more receptive to coming back.
I love all these points. I wanted to share a metric with the group here. You know, just after asking a number of my clients how their process went dropping insurance, I'm typically seeing anywhere from 5 to 20% patient attrition if someone's going out of network. And Robert, you might be able to speak to that. But ultimately, what I've seen is if you can retain 80% of your patients, but then you're charging your actual UCR fees instead of the discounted insurance rates, you're usually able to offset that attrition, the 5 to 20%, with the increase in collections per patient that you'll be receiving. So that's what I've been noticing. Yeah, there's going to be some fallout on patients, but that should be able to be offset with the increase in collections.
Sometimes
Now,
what I'll do with patients, if I'm going UCR, I may give them a nice 15% discount on their bill, so that it's not that big a hit, and I'm still making more money, but I'm still giving the patient a discount. But it really comes down to you've got to come to some decision, because I was going through so much frustration. I'd get a bill back. The filling, you know, UCR was $310, let's say, and the insurance company paid $28. Well, I mean, how in the hell, that didn't even cover, you know, anything, my overhead. I lost money, and that goes with crowns. It goes with everything. So somebody has to dig deep inside themselves and make a decision. Am I going to bite the bullet and go through hell for a little while? Or am I going to just stay on the same horse and just ride it until I drop dead?
Yeah. Well, that's a good transition. I think that we have a poll that I want to share with the audience, and this should show up on your screen now, and you can check as many boxes as you like. We're just interested in understanding, you know, how you're thinking about this. We think these are some of the options, probably not all of them, but these are some of the things that Brett's clients and other Thomas Dole clients have been doing. There's certainly a school of thought that says, look, with all these changes coming, I'm just going to ride it out and work longer and defer retirement. Or some practices are saying, no, we need to go back and negotiate better PPO rates. And we're hearing some success stories about, either yourself being able to negotiate or hiring a consultant. There are people who specialize in these kinds of negotiations. For other dentists, sometimes it's a question of not only negotiating the better PPO rates, but figuring out what are the best PPO contracts that are bringing you the best patients and that make the most sense for your practice, instead of just saying we're going to accept, everything. And then there's, the school of thought that says, like Robert, it's time to go out of network. And really, I think the way to communicate that to patients is to say, I'm going to operate independently. I think saying you're going out of network sounds like a real bad thing. Like, wait, you're out of network? It's like you're operating in the the Wild West frontier or something. No, you're making a decision to operate independently of the insurance companies and their restrictions, and that patients can still use their benefits with you. It's just going to change the way that they're processed, and they may have to pay a little bit more out of pocket, but they're going to get high value care over the long run. Some dentists are saying they're going to sell their practice, that this is the time for them to retire and, frankly, let somebody else deal with all these pressures and the responses to them. So the poll has been up. I think only 6 of you have voted. So I don't know if you're having any barriers. Let me leave it open a little bit longer. Now I've got 7 votes. 9. So the votes are trickling in. These will be easy to count. We won't need a recount or anything, and you can vote multiple times. You can vote for multiple options. In a second, I'll end the polling and show the results. Okay, here we go. Let's take a look. So you should now see on your screen, there are a number of you who are looking at just writing it out. Some of you are going to go after the PPO rates and contracts. It looks like one of you, and that might be Robert, is out of network. Somebody's selling their practice, and then there's some other options that people are pursuing. I'm curious about this is pretty representative of what we're seeing across other presentations we're doing. I'm curious about the other options, because we can always update our poll to include other alternatives. Who said other, and what are they thinking of? Can you unmute yourself or share in the chat?
Yeah, I would rather go out of network.
Okay, so that's the 4th option here. Declare independence, go out of network. Okay, yeah, so let me open it up again for any comments before we move on. We think this is a good transition, that we're going to talk about a case study on what happens now when people sell their practice or when you go to acquire a practice in this changing environment. So before we transition there, let me just pause and see if there are any other questions before we move on. Okay, go ahead and close the poll so
Jeff,
you can. Oh, go ahead, Brett.
I'm going to just say one comment, and we've had most times speaking about going out of network, and what does that look like? That's a big jump, right? And so it's just from the poll we see it's probably not for everybody, and we know that not everybody's just going to be able to make that leap. I think it depends on, it's a relationship move. It depends on the tenure of the doctor, the tenure of your staff, the amount of training time you can put in. It might take 6 months to train on how you're going to communicate this to your patients. It depends on your ability to track practice metrics and your ability to retain, a solid 80% of your insured currently insured patients. So there's a lot of things that go into that, and so we're not coming out here saying, hey, you have to go out of network necessarily. Some people have that opinion, but there's definitely lots of options, as we can see from the poll, and just knowing what the best course of action is for you.
Yeah, and on this, a webinar this length, we can't necessarily get into all the details of how Thomas Dole clients, for example, are approaching these different options. But if you want to email Brett or stick around at what I'm calling overtime at 7:30, we'll stick around for overtime to discuss a little bit more. One thing that's been popular in our presentations is this case study. So I want to get to that while we have just a little bit of time. And so if you still have your poll up on your screen, go ahead and close out that window so you can see the flow chart that I'm showing. And this is a flow chart that we've put together that Brett is going to use to illustrate a real case study that's been now, de-identified. So we're not sharing anybody's names, but this is a real practice and real numbers. Brett, why don't you take it away and talk through how you present this?
Quick background on this: when a practice is valued, it's typically valued on cash flow. Now there's some other variables that go into that. You could have all brand new equipment and the latest remodel, and that stuff can impact the value. But in most cases, it's a cash flow valuation. And a practice will either sell anywhere from 70 to 85% of collections, in that range. That's kind of a high level way to look at it. Or more accurately, will sell anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times what's called the adjusted net income of the practice. That's essentially net income before owner benefits. Any discretionary expenses are pulled out, and all of you guys are practice owners, so should know that. So that's just a quick recap. So this is a real live practice that's sold, and we're going to start up there at number 1. 46% of their patients, this was a Delta Premier provider, 46% of the patients were non-Delta, okay? And then we have number 2 right there. 54% of the collections was coming in from these Delta Premier patients. So total insurance, number 3, was 70%. So 70% of all the practice collections was coming in from insured patients, and basically 38% of 54% of the insured patients were on Premier. Okay, so if we're looking at the total collections of this, 38% of all the collections of the practice, total collections was coming in from Delta Premier collections. And what's happening is there's this discount we've talked about, and we use a discount rate of 38%. That was essentially the hit that the buyer was going to take if they were to buy this practice. So, if a buyer's buying a Delta Premier practice, they're losing those Delta Premier rates. They're not going to be able to continue to take those Delta Premier rates, and they're now going to be taking the PPO rates. And so essentially they're going to have, a 25 to 38% decrease in collections from those Delta Premier patients. So when you do the math, you get to line number 8 there, Delta PPO collections discount. It's a 14% discount on the practice to the buyer. We call that a haircut. We call that the PPO haircut. They're basically going to, by buying the practice, they're going to lose 14% of collections if nothing's changed. That's the important thing. So now we go down into, that's the background of what's going on. We have 2 columns. There's the blue, number 5, and the red. And the blue is the blue columns are basing it on what the seller's looking at. That's the seller's eyes. They have a practice that's done 1.176 million in collections, 1.174, and in 2015, 1.164. And their expected collections, going in, this is line 10 in the blue, 1.173. The overhead, the cost of the practice, 678. That's line 11 on the left. And then we drop down to line 12 is the expected net income, 494. So that's what the seller is taking home essentially on this office, about $500,000 of net income. When this is all valued, when we put it in our model, a practice like this is generating about $500,000 of net income. That would be valued at about 887. That's line 15. And they were asking $1 million. So they were asking on the high end, the good cash flowing practice, given a little bit of a premium, asking $1 million on line 16 on a practice that was probably going to be valued at about 887. So we've got a $113,000 difference from the asking price on what they were going at for. So now the buyer comes in. We're going to jump over to the red column over there in the right side of this. And now we have this PPO haircut that's going on. So essentially right from the get-go, if the buyer walks into this, they're going to have about a $170,000 haircut right off the top line. And that's going to go all the way to the bottom line. They're basically losing $170,000 worth of income that the seller was used to taking home. So if we jump down to line number 12, you can see how that impacts the expected net income. It flows through. You got about a $170,000 difference. And now I'm going to jump down to line 15 on the right. Now the estimated value of this practice, if we're valuing it with this $170,000 haircut, now only 674, right? And so if you're valuing it just on cash flow to the buyer, we would expect that practice to sell for 674 instead of 887. And now we're at a $325,000 difference in asking price. That's a big adjustment, right? So this is what we're seeing, that this challenge we see, every other week when buyers come to us for buyer representation. They're buying these Delta Premier practices, and even though they look like really good practices, typically we're seeing that the asking price that they're asking is much higher than a typical cash flow model would suggest. $200,000, $300,000 difference. And the question is, should the asking price be adjusted down for these types of practices, right? should the seller really be asking, $674 for a practice that was doing 1.1 in collections and about $500,000 of net income, if they're going to have these big Delta Premier haircuts off the top line? And about half the brokers we've been working with, have been adjusting prices down. The other half, are kind of leaving them where they're at and kind of leaving it up to the buyer to figure things out. It's hard for the buyer because they have to take on the practice debt. So we have a line there, number 13 and number 14 on the right. You can see if we add on a $124,000 loan payment, a really good practice like this brings the cash flow after debt service down to 202. It still works, still a good practice, but in a lot of cases where cash flow was a little lower, it makes things tight. They have to pay their loan payment. These young doctors are buying houses. They want to get into a house. They want to pay their student debt. It sure makes it a challenge when we're dealing with heavy Delta Premier practices. And usually we're trying to negotiate the price down or looking for practices that have good opportunity to bring extra dentistry in-house or, have growth potential there. So that's the gist of what I'm seeing in the industry right now, with buyers in particular. If you're a seller, if you're nearing retirement, and you're going to put your practice up, and you're a heavy Delta Premier provider, you need to know that you might need to take a hit to your asking price that you have in your mind, because a lot of buyers just might not be able to make it work out. Any questions on this? If you have any questions, you can send them through the chat, or we can circle back through any of these lines for clarification. Jeff, any comments on that from what we've seen from other comments that we've received over time?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think when we've presented this elsewhere, it's a bit of a shock to the sellers who've built these practices with Delta Premier rates. And in some cases, they are still collecting Delta Premier rates, even though maybe they're starting to come up to the brink of violating, or going over the brink of violating some of the terms, where now they have associates and they're still billing under their Premier rate, or they've added facilities, which I think is contraindicated, for continuing the Premier rates. So, everyone is still clinging. Not everyone. Many people are still clinging to these kind of the Premier economics, which actually work, reasonably well. Certainly work a lot better than the PPO economics. And so I think it's just a real tough, message. Now, like you've said, what we're hearing is that some of the buyers are still getting close to or meeting the asking prices, but they're figuring out that they're going to have to, do more marketing or start those responses like negotiating better PPO rates or going out of network if they're going to really make the economics work. So there's sort of pain on both sides of this equation, I think, and that's unfortunate, but that's the reality. We want everyone to be dealing with the reality.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because we most certainly aren't suggesting that every seller that's a Delta Premier provider needs to decrease their asking price. It's still somewhat of a seller's market, and we're certainly not suggesting that. But it's more. It kind of just depends on what opportunities you have. If you have dentistry you've been referring out, and there's opportunities for a buyer to bring stuff in, yeah, you probably don't need to adjust stuff down. But if that's not an option for a buyer, they're going to have to figure out how to close that gap. There's this gap, $170,000 hit. How are they going to make that up? Is it working an extra day? Is it doing these things you suggested, Jeff? And I think that's the key.
Yeah, and we've seen things, where some of the practices are not optimizing their hygiene opportunities, or there's various consultants, practice management and other consultants out there who are really very good at helping dentists who want to be a little bit more aggressive in their marketing or in their kind of practice optimization, really sort out the investments they need to make and how they can make this kind of practice work. We have a couple questions. Robert asked, what is the average overhead percentage?
So I'm assuming that's just across the board for any general practice, and that's typically the income before owner expenses. So your profit margin on the low end for the industry averages is about 25%. I would say the average is more like 40%. So that means 60% overhead, 40% profit margin. Again, we're talking about before doctor expenses and owner benefits. On the high end, a lot of times we'll see practices up to 55%. Usually they're not going to go above that on profit margin. A 55% profit margin 45% overhead.
And then there's
on the high end there.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. And then there's a question from Shilpa, and I'm just paying attention to the time. We're hitting our hour mark here. But maybe you can comment on these negotiations where there's this big gap. How do you negotiate down 200,000 to 300,000? There's probably a lot of variation here, and some people probably walk away from deals that don't make sense. And then what have you seen, Brett, in your negotiations?
It kind of depends on how profitable the practice is, right? So if we're talking about a real large practice that's, where the buyer's still able to take home $300,000 after all is said and done, there's going to be another buyer out there, even if they're overpaying based on these models. The model suggesting that the practice is only worth X amount, because that's what we're seeing around the industry. There's usually on those high cash flowing practices, there's going to be other buyers that come in and they'll pay even if it's way overvalued. If it's a lower, a smaller operation, 500,000 in collections to 800,000, there's usually not a big cushion to work with. And, it's really, throwing something out there. Maybe you show where you're coming from on the cash flow, show them these types of these analysis on what you would be actually taking home as a buyer. And, usually the sellers realize that's it just doesn't work out, unless something is substantially changed in the operations of the practice, people aren't going to buy it. And so there is some negotiating room there.
And I've certainly seen you and your colleagues get really creative with, with the brokers and with the dentists involved about, there can be, side arrangements that revolve around the real estate or, debt management or other, kind of associating people back to the practice. So I don't think we have time to get into all of them, but again, we can stick around in overtime, or you can email Brett for more information. Let's bring things to a close for the official portion. Like I said, we're happy to stick around. I do want to ask you, we are doing these presentations and we're happy to do them, but when we do them live in person, we're able to hand out a feedback survey and get it, before people leave the room. And we've had a harder time with these virtual Zoom presentations. This feedback survey is really critical for us. We really need to be, focusing our efforts to having you all benefit from these presentations. So we want your candid feedback. If you see things we're not doing well, or you see opportunities for improvement, or you think we're doing things well and we should keep doing them for your colleagues, and you have ideas about other people we should be talking to, study groups or whatever, please go to this feedback link. It's tinyurl.com/SMCDS2. So I'll show you what that looks like on the screen. It's a really short survey, and you can skip the questions if you don't want to answer them, but we really would like you to answer them to the best of your ability. It's just 4 or 5 open questions. What key points of the program were most useful to you? What else would you like to know about this topic that we just ran out of time on? And then, do you have any tips that might improve the program or clarify anything that was confusing? These are all required, but if you don't want to answer the question, just type in skip, and you'll essentially move on. If you really like the program, then it's helpful for dentists to hear from each other. So if you want to give us a quote to use as a testimonial, that's great. And if you think of anybody else you think we should present this to, we'll follow up with you, but you might have a study club or another dental society or colleagues. And then just if you would give us an overall rating. And what we found is a combination of, give us your rating and then tell us whether this was worse, same, or better than other, let's say, practice management programs that you've attended in the last year. That way we get an idea of how hard a grader you are. And we know relatively how we're doing in addition to your absolute rating. And then any other comments you have. So again, this is tinyurl.com/SMCDS2. And this is so important to us. And, we're really doing this on a voluntary basis. We asked Nakia if we could require this of you before, she gives out your CE credit. What we'll do is we'll track the survey responses and give her the list of people. If you really object to this and you don't want to fill out our survey, then just type in skip, and that way we'll forward your name to Nakia, who will give you the CE credit. If you're not going for CE credit, we still want your input and your feedback. So please, you can do this right now in like 3 minutes and then just be done with it. So I'll leave it up here on the screen, the SMCDS2. I think Brett put his email address in the chat. And if you want to sign off now, we want to bring things to a close before everyone has Zoom fatigue. We're super happy you came, and we're very grateful to the San Mateo County Dental Society for having us. If you want to stick around and open your mic, Brett and I, like I said, we'll call this overtime, and we'll stick around for overtime. Thank you all very much. Nakia, is there anything you wanted to add, or anyone from the Dental Society? Any last words or announcements?
No, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank
It
you.
was
And
great. Yeah.
thank you. Good.
Thank
Yeah.
you. It was a good presentation.
Thank you. Good
Yeah. Thanks for
presentation.
chiming in, Robert. Thank you all. I'll leave the line open for a minute to see if anybody wants to ask any further questions, but otherwise you're welcome to sign off.
Do you think that you might present maybe possibly another one of these, maybe a little in depth, maybe a little longer, for a little more participation with the participants? I'm on the back end of my career, so I'm more than happy to help others, try and get out from underneath this if they can. But I would like to see this offered more, or a larger, maybe 2 hours or something, because it was pretty informative. I think it was excellent information.
Great. Yeah, Robert, I think, what could be really valuable if Nakia and others want to help us organize this is to do maybe a bit of a panel with some of the members who have had different experiences, because I think you all learn so much from each other. And like you said, there may be people at different stages of their careers. So we'd be happy to help facilitate that, and provide some of our research. But I think what you're suggesting is really valuable, that people like you could be case studies, and provide a little bit more in-depth stories and advice about how you've navigated this.
And the thing is too, I'm not a Delta Premier provider. I've owned multiple practices out of state, and then I came back to California, and then I taught at UOP Dental School for multiple years. And then I decided to open another practice, just for myself. And so I wasn't able to become a Delta Premier. So I walked away from Delta Insurance not being a Delta Premier. So I know what it's like for folks that are not Delta Premier to have to make that decision. And I truly believe it's a good decision to make.
Yeah, although, it must be a kind of what I've heard from people is it's a leap of faith, right? You're kind of plunging into the unknown, and that can be scary.
Yeah, it was definitely. But, there's a lot of different things that you can do to keep patients and bring them in. But I was just starting to see some of the insurance reimbursements. It was insanity. I'm telling you, it was just really insane what they're doing. And now Delta's cutting the reimbursements to endodontists, periodontists. They're going to do a global fee so that when you do a crown, you can't charge for the buildup. Different things like that.
Yeah.
And then several of the insurance companies got together, and they're using this connection fee schedule, where all of them jump on board, so they don't, like Blue Cross, Blue Shield, several of the other ones don't have their own insurance reimbursements. They just join this connection, and this connection sets their fee schedule, which sometimes is lower than even Delta.
Yeah, it seems
It's
like
getting ugly.
some other people on today's session were talking about that in the chat. I mean, I think this is really a larger industry trend, and it may be across industries that for many years, reimbursement rates were close enough to UCRs that you could viably have a small practice. When I say small, I mean like an independent family size kind of practice. Whereas I think what we're going to see is that the middle is going to fall out of the market, and that there's going to be either consolidation to practicing at an industrial scale, or people are going to move up market and preserve their high touch concierge level, quality and attention and craftsmanship, and really artistry in dentistry. And they're going to have to find ways of billing outside of insurance for that. So the middle is falling out, I think. This is what's
You're absolutely right. I think what's happening, you can see it in medicine. You're seeing a lot of these concierge medical clinics popping up.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to happen to dentistry in the near future. That the way it was 15, 20 years ago, it's not going to be around anymore. You're either going to be part of the huge Western Dental or Heartland Dental or something of that nature, or large DSOs, dental service organizations, or you're going to be a high-end concierge clinic. And there's going to be in no middle. You're right.
And you know what's been interesting to me, because my background is a little bit more on the medical side in health policy, is that initially when concierge medicine emerged, everyone thought, oh, this is going to be an affordability crisis. Only the very wealthy are going to be able to afford this. And it turned out, I mean, there's some truth to that. There's definitely maybe an affordability issue, but it's been a much more middle-class phenomenon than people realized, because a lot of families that have like two working parents who are working in, shift jobs or just have real time constraints, they are paying $3,500 a year to a concierge practice so that they have house calls, or that they can, bring their kids on the weekends, or, at after hour kinds of times. So what happens with concierge doctors is they cap their number of patients at 100 or 200 or whatever the number is that makes sense for them. And then they're able to give this very attentive level of, care, and make house calls and see people at odd hours. And, that turns out to be really economically viable, even for like the middle class in a lot of cases. So I don't know if you think that same dynamic could occur in dentistry, but that's what we've been seeing in medicine.
I definitely think it'll happen. I don't know what it'll look like, obviously, but somebody's smart enough out there, they'll figure it out, and they'll start doing it. Because a lot of patients aren't happy with the quality of care they're getting and stuff. And truthfully, I understand. I mean, at UOP, these kids were getting out at $500,000 a year student loans, and then if you pile on your apartment and a practice, you have to do a lot of dentistry.
Yeah.
And sometimes you push the envelope, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I wanted to thank you guys. It was a great meeting, and I think it's a great service that this be provided again, really. Because there's a lot of folks out there that are, I believe, that are really struggling. They're scared. They don't know where to turn. They don't know what to do. And they're just, it's getting tight. It's getting tight.
Yeah. 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 Well, thank you for the
I wanted
comments.
to point out
Go ahead, Brent.
I wanted to point out the chat comment in case people still on haven't seen it. Nakia said email her at her email address if you're interested in sitting on the panel. And if we can't get enough people on the panel, we can certainly pull from, our client base and make sure we have something lined up if that's of interest for this for the Dental Society.
Okay, I'll email it.
Yeah, so we'll follow your lead. I think Nakia and colleagues, we're certainly enthusiastic about doing a more in-depth session and featuring more colleagues and more case studies and all that. So happy to work with you all that. But I think the audience has to really want it. So
Yeah, true enough.
poll your members and see if this is something that they would attend. Like if it were an hour and a half or a couple hours and it featured more of their colleagues, more case studies, we'd be happy to help.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and you too, Brett.
Welcome.
Good night, all.
Yeah, sounds like maybe we'll bring overtime to a close, and thank you all, and we'll see you maybe on a panel discussion in the near future.